Marissa Blake was an ordinary nurse finishing a long shift until a sudden medical crisis stopped her heart cold. For 7 minutes, she was clinically dead, but during those minutes, she claimed she was taken beyond the veil of death and shown a series of prophetic visions by Jesus himself, warnings for humanity about what's coming. In June 2026, what she saw changed everything. This is not just a testimony, it's a wake-up call the world cannot ignore. Hold on a minute. If you have not subscribed to our channel, do well to subscribe, like, comment, and share videos of this channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell.
My name is Marissa Lane. I'm 34 years old, a registered nurse living in Asheville, North Carolina. I've worked the night shift at a local hospital for almost 7 years. My days usually begin just before sunset. I brew a strong cup of coffee, check on my cat Jasper, and pull on my scrubs. I've always liked caring for people, even before I knew I wanted to be a nurse. It felt like something I was made for, bringing calm into chaotic places. I wasn't super religious growing up, though my mom took us to church every now and then. As an adult, I'd call myself a Christian, but honestly, I wasn't living like one. I believed in God, but he felt distant. Life was busy. Between 12-hour shifts, my sister's divorce, and my own struggles with anxiety, I didn't make much time for prayer. I'd scroll through devotionals on my phone sometimes, maybe say a rushed prayer before bed, but deep down, I was drifting. Doubt crept in quietly. Was God even listening? It was a Tuesday in late spring, a warm, peaceful morning after a long shift. I remember driving home with the windows down, feeling exhausted but calm. I stopped at a red light near the edge of town, not far from the turn onto my street. The next thing I remember clearly is a loud crash, a deafening metal-on-metal sound, and my body being thrown forward. A truck had run the light and slammed straight into the driver's side of my car. Everything slowed down. I couldn't move. My chest hurt, and it was getting harder to breathe. People talk about their life flashing before their eyes. For me, it wasn't like that. It was more like everything in my life. The people I loved, the choices I made, just stood still, and I realized how far I had drifted from the faith I used to know. It wasn't fear that filled me. It was a regret. Paramedics showed up fast. I could hear their voices faintly, like they were underwater. Someone was shouting my name, telling me to hold on. Then, without warning, everything went dark. I stopped hearing them. I stopped feeling my body. It was like a deep sleep had taken over me. But my mind stayed awake. I later found out my heart had stopped at the scene. I was clinically dead for several minutes. In those final seconds before the darkness, one thought repeated in my head: God, if you're real, don't let this be the end. I didn't know what was waiting for me. I just knew I wasn't ready. I hadn't really lived the way I should have. And yet, in that quiet moment, as my life slipped away, I felt something like a pull, a presence. I didn't understand it then. All I knew was that something beyond this world had started to reach for me. I didn't realize I had died at. There was no pain, no sound, no movement, just silence. It was like I had fallen into the deepest sleep of my life, but somehow I was still aware. I couldn't feel my body anymore. The weight of it, the pain from the crash, it was all gone. At first, there was only darkness. Not the kind of darkness that's scary, but one that felt still, like time had stopped. Then I became aware that I wasn't lying down anymore. I was floating. I wasn't touching anything, yet I didn't feel like I was falling either, just suspended, as if the laws of gravity didn't apply here. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I didn't have a mouth to form them. I didn't even have a body to move, but my thoughts were sharp and clear. I remember thinking, am I dead? The strange part was that I didn't feel afraid. I thought I would panic in a moment like that, but instead I felt calm. There was a deep, heavy silence around me, but inside I was beginning to feel a gentle warmth. It wasn't like heat from the sun. It was something more personal, more alive. It felt like something or someone knew I was there, even though I was in complete darkness. Then something changed. In the far distance, I noticed a soft light. It started as just a small dot, but slowly it grew brighter. The light wasn't harsh. It was welcoming, the kind of light that makes you want to draw closer to it. As I moved toward it, though I didn't feel myself moving in the usual sense, the darkness around me began to fade. The closer I got, the more I felt a kind of peace I had never known before. Not the kind that comes and goes, but the kind that fills every part of you. And just before the light completely surrounded me, I had one last thought about my life. Everything I thought was important suddenly seemed so small. I was stepping into something far bigger, far deeper than anything I had ever imagined. As the light grew brighter around me, I felt something I had never felt before. Not just peace, but love. Real, living love. It wasn't just an emotion. It felt like the air itself was made of love. I knew without anyone saying it that I was fully seen, fully known, and completely accepted. Then I sensed a presence, strong but gentle. The light seemed to gather, almost like it was becoming a person. I didn't see a face right away, but I knew who it was. I just knew. It was Jesus. Not the way I'd seen him in pictures or movies. This wasn't a man in robes with a calm expression. This was glory. Light poured from him, not just around him, but from within him. It was alive, pulsing with warmth and power. The light coming from him didn't hurt my eye. Instead, it healed something deep inside me. Just by being near it, I fell before him, not with my body, because I didn't have one, but with my soul. If I had knees, I would have collapsed. His presence was so holy, so pure, and yet so full of compassion that I wept, not out of fear, but from being overwhelmed by the beauty of it all. He didn't speak right away, but I felt everything he wanted to say. You are loved, you are mine, you were never alone. All the doubts I had carried, the ones about my faith, about whether God was real, whether he even noticed me, they melted away. Just being in his presence made those questions seem silly. I had never felt so sure of anything in my life. I wasn't just looking at the truth. I was in the presence of truth himself. Then Jesus looked at me, and even though I couldn't see his eyes in the way we see human eyes, I felt them. They saw right through me, not to judge, but to heal. And then his voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Every word went through me, like a warm current of water. He said gently, I have something to show you. That simple sentence felt like an invitation, not a command. There was no fear in me, only I knew that whatever he wanted to show me would change everything. And with those words, everything around us began to shift. The light remained, but now it was opening into something more, like a door into another part of his world. As the light around Jesus shifted, it felt like I was being carried forward, not in time as we know it, but into something that was already real in God's eyes. It was as if he pulled back a curtain and let me look into the future. I didn't walk, I was shown. I didn't imagine, I witnessed. The first thing I saw was the world, but not the way I had known it. I saw people, millions of them, from different nations, languages, and cultures. They were on their knees, in streets, homes, churches, fields. Some knelt on sidewalks with their faces buried in their hands. Others stood with their hands lifted high, tears streaming down their faces, and they weren't crying from fear. They were overwhelmed by something holy. I could feel it, even watching from a distance. The weight of conviction had fallen on the earth, but so had mercy. I saw churches, small and large, overflowing. People lined up outside, waiting to get in, desperate for truth, desperate for God. I saw pastors preaching with fire and boldness, no longer afraid of losing approval. I saw regular people, young, old, rich, poor, standing in front of crowds, or sharing online, boldly declaring how Jesus had changed them. In one moment, I saw a man throw a bag of drugs into a fire. In another, a young woman smashed crystals and tarot cards in the middle of her room, her hands shaking as she worshipped Jesus through tears. People were burning pornography, deleting secret social media accounts, giving up addictions, walking away from old lives like they were shedding heavy chains. Social media was full of testimonies. I saw phones recording people in parks, subways, classrooms, telling stories of deliverance. People were writing long posts, not for likes, but from genuine joy. I met Jesus, they kept saying. I found what I've been missing. The flood wasn't of information, but transformation. It was like a holy fire had spread, and it didn't destroy, it purified. Then I heard Jesus speak. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across everything I was seeing. "This is the beginning of the awakening," he said. Those words were simple, but I felt them down to the core of my being. It wasn't just a revival in one city or one group. It was global. It wasn't built around one name or one leader. It was driven by repentance and hunger for truth. And somehow I knew the time was June 20. Jesus didn't explain everything, but I understood this awakening would come suddenly, and people would either run to the light or shrink away from it, but it would be undeniable. A moment in history when heaven touched earth in a way that couldn't be ignored. And then the vision began to fade, and I turned to Jesus, heart pounding, wondering what he would show me next. As the first vision faded, the atmosphere around Jesus grew still again. But this time I felt a shift. Something more serious, almost weighty. Without words, I knew I was about to see something darker. The scene changed. I was looking at the earth once more, but now a strange light spread across the globe. It looked beautiful at first, shining, glittering, almost like it was offering hope. People stared at it, drawn in like moths to a flame. They were smiling, celebrating, embracing it. But deep inside, I knew something was wrong. Then I saw what was behind the light. It was a false light, twisted, seductive, meant to mimic the real presence of God. I saw New Age ideas being preached, like truth, messages about becoming your higher self, awakening to inner divinity, and manifesting your own reality. It looked spiritual, even kind. But Jesus wasn't in it. There were people who called themselves prophets, teachers, even healers. They had large followings. They performed signs that amazed crowds. But they didn't speak of repentance or the cross. They didn't speak of sin. Their words felt smooth, pleasing, even comforting, but hollow. I could sense the emptiness behind their power. I saw churches falling into this deception. Not all of them, but enough to make my heart ache. Some leaders chose popularity over truth. They stopped talking about Jesus as the only way. They replaced the gospel with messages about energy, unity, and universal love that excluded repentance. People were clapping, cheering, but they were blind. Then Jesus spoke again. His tone was steady, but urgent. "Even the elect will be tested," he said. Those words pierced me. I understood then. This false light wouldn't come with obvious evil. It would be disguised as good, as progress, as enlightenment. People wouldn't know they were being led away unless they were anchored in the truth. Jesus looked at me with deep love and said, "Tell them to stay close to me, to know my voice, to stay in my word. Not all light comes from me. Some leads to darkness." Tears filled my eyes. I realized how easily anyone could be deceived if they didn't stay connected to him. Then the vision dimmed. The false light still lingered in my mind. But so did the warning. Cling to Jesus. Know his truth. The days ahead would require more than belief. They would require discernment. As the vision of the false light faded, I felt a deep heaviness come over me. The atmosphere around me shifted again. Jesus was still beside me, but what I was about to see felt more painful, more real than anything so far. The scene opened to cities all over the world. I saw governments passing laws that seemed harmless on the surface, but were aimed directly at people who followed Jesus wholeheartedly. It started with words like intolerance and hate speech. Then came restriction. Pastors who preached about sin and salvation through Christ alone were arrested. Some churches were shut down. Others were forced to change what they preached in order to stay open. I saw believers being called dangerous, old-fashioned. They were mocked on the news and banned on social media. Many lost their jobs simply for holding to biblical beliefs. Christian teachers, doctors, and business owners were pushed out. It wasn't just in one country. It was global. But then in the middle of all this pressure, I saw something beautiful. In basements, living rooms, and quiet forest, small groups of believers gathered to pray, worship, and read the Bible together. They weren't afraid. They were alive. There was so much joy in their eyes. The Holy Spirit moved powerfully among them. Miracles happened quietly. People were healed. Hearts were transformed. They sang with no instruments, but the sound was pure. They preached without microphones, but the message was sharp and clear. They had no stage, No lights, no spotlight. But the presence of God filled every room they gathered in. Jesus looked at me again, and his face was both serious and full of love. "This is the separation," he said softly. "The wheat is being separated from the chaff." I understood. The pressure, the persecution. It was revealing what was real. It was purifying the church. No more playing church. No more lukewarm faith. People either stood with him or turned away. I saw young people leading underground movements of prayer, elderly believers mentoring others in secret, children receiving dreams from the Lord. The fire of revival didn't stop with the persecution. It grew because of it. As the vision faded, I felt something shift in me, a holy determination. I knew that no matter what was coming, Jesus was worth it. Even in suffering, there was joy. Even in loss, there was gain. And Jesus was with them, always. The next vision came like a wave of thunder. Everything around me became still. So still I could feel the weight of eternity pressing in. Jesus stood beside me, and I sensed that what I was about to witness was not just a vision. It was a glimpse into the final moment of this world, as we know it. Suddenly the sky above me began to darken, not with clouds, but with a thick spiritual stillness. All of creation seemed to be holding its breath. Then, without warning, the heavens tore open, not like a storm or a crack, but like a great veil being pulled back by unseen hands. A light brighter than the sun poured through. It wasn't warm and gentle like the light I saw earlier. This was fierce, holy, and unstoppable. And from the center of this brilliant light, I saw him, Jesus, coming down with power and glory. He wasn't the humble man I had seen before. Now he was clothed in majesty, riding on clouds, surrounded by blazing angels with trumpets in their hands. Lightning flashed around him, and the sound of the trumpets shook the earth. All over the world, people looked up. Some dropped to their knees in worship and love, tears pouring down their faces. Others screamed in fear, trying to hide, but there was nowhere to run. Every eye saw him, every nation, tribe, and tongue. There was no doubt, no question. The king had come. The angels blew their trumpets, and their sound was not just loud. It was final, a sound of truth, of justice, of the end of delay. I saw people who had mocked Jesus fall to the ground, trembling. I saw others, faithful ones, lifting their arms with joy, calling out his name. The contrast was sharp. Some bowed because they loved him. Others bowed because they had to. Jesus turned to me in that moment, his eyes full of fire and love. He spoke, and his voice filled the heavens. "Be ready," he said. "I come for a pure bride." I saw what he meant. Those who loved him had washed their robes in his blood. They weren't perfect, but they were real. Their faith had been tested and found true. They had let go of the world and held tightly to him. He was coming for them. Then I saw angels moving quickly, gathering his people from every corner of the earth. It wasn't chaotic, it was holy. A great reunion was happening, and the joy was indescribable. The earth shook again, and I saw the kingdoms of the world crumble. Buildings, thrones were cast down. The pride of man was broken in a single moment. What had once seemed powerful now looked like dust. And still Jesus descended, clothed in justice and mercy. Everything I thought I knew about power and glory was nothing compared to this moment. The second coming wasn't distant anymore. It was close. And I understood in the depths of my soul why Jesus had shown me all the other visions first. They were the preparation. This was the fulfillment. As the vision began to fade, I fell to my knees. I could barely breathe from the awe and the beauty. Jesus is coming, and he is not coming quietly. He is coming for those who truly love him, with hearts that are his and lives that are surrendered. He is coming soon. The next thing I remember was a strange, violent pull, like being yanked through space. The light faded, and I was suddenly rushing backward. I didn't want to go. I wasn't ready to leave that place, or him. Then everything went dark again. I heard noise first, muffled shouting. Quick movements, the sound of someone crying out orders. Then pain, sharp, hot pain, in my chest. I gasped like I had been drowning, and air filled my lungs like fire. I was back in my body. My eyes shot open, bright lights above me, EMTs all around. One of them shouted, "She's back, we got her." I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Tears streamed down my face, not because of the pain, though my body felt like it had been crushed, not because I was scared. I cried because I had seen him, because I had been there, because now, I was back in a broken world. They lifted me onto a stretcher, and I sobbed uncontrollably. One of the paramedics leaned down, trying to calm me, but there was no way to explain what I had just experienced. I wasn't crying because of the accident. I was crying because I had tasted eternity. Everything felt strange, too small, too loud, too rushed. The hospital lights were harsh, and the beeping machines irritated me. I didn't want to be here. I didn't care about the bruises or the pain in my chest. I just kept repeating in my mind, I saw him. I saw Jesus. He's real. The doctors worked quickly. I was stabilized, but my heart was still racing, not just from trauma, but from awe. Every part of me ached, but not nearly as much as the ache to go back. I couldn't understand how I had returned from something so holy, so eternal, back into this fragile temporary life. The world I had left behind looked so different now. Nothing here felt real compared to what I had seen, and yet I knew I had been sent back for a reason. I was alive, but I would never be the same again. The days after I left the hospital were harder than I expected, not because of the physical recovery, but because I didn't know how to talk about what I had seen. How do you explain something that feels more real than the ground under your feet? I tried to tell one of the nurses what happened. She smiled politely and said, "That's the brain protecting itself. Some patients have wild dreams when they die briefly. It's normal." But what I saw wasn't a dream. It didn't feel foggy or strange. It was clearer than this light. At home, I told my best friend Jenna. She looked at me with kind eyes, but didn't know what to say. "Maybe it was the medication," she offered, "or your brain trying to make sense of everything." I didn't blame them. I understood why they doubted me, but it hurt. I started to wonder if I had imagined it all. Was it just the trauma, a dream, my mind playing tricks? That doubt crept in slowly. I replayed the visions over and over, trying to see if I had added anything to them in my mind. But each time, it was the same, vivid, holy, weighty. Still, the silence from those around me made me feel like I was going crazy. One night I sat alone in my bedroom, holding my Bible, but unable to read. I stared at the pages and whispered, "God, was it real? Or am I making this up?" There was no booming voice or vision this time, but a deep peace settled over me. I remembered Jesus's eyes, how they saw right through me with love. I remembered his words, "I have something to show you." That was enough. I didn't need everyone to believe me. I just needed to hold on to what I knew was true. And I knew without a doubt, it was real.